My name is Jesse Lund, and I'm the Vice President of Blockchain, and I overlook the financial services portfolio and some of the investments that IBM's making in the space. Today we have a really fun panel. We're going to be talking to some colleagues of mine who I'll introduce in just a moment. But what we're going to be talking about today is digital assets, cryptocurrencies, central bank issued digital currencies, the mania of stablecoin. IBM has a product called WorldWire, which you can read about on our website, which is a blockchain-based real-time clearing and settlement system or cross-border payment system that is unique in that it makes use of a ecosystem of digital assets that are used as settlement instruments to facilitate real-time FX and the delivery of value from anywhere in the world to anywhere else in the world in real time. So you can go read more about that online, but I'm joined here today with a panelist of friends and colleagues. To my immediate left is Tammy Camp. She's the CEO of Stronghold, which is a stablecoin issuer, and I'll let her tell you a little bit more about herself and her company. Next to her is Jed McCaleb. He's the founder of the Stellar Development Foundation. And then last but not least, Mike Warner, who is visiting us from up the street at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. So he's our adult supervision this morning. Welcome to our panelists. So why don't I just what gets you going in the morning?
Hi everyone, I'm Tammy. I'm the CEO of Stronghold. Basically, we're a financial services platform that's native to distributed ledger technology. And what really excites me is that we get to take part in a way that makes everything a little more efficient, kind of how perhaps when the music industry started digitizing their music. We're kind of seeing the same things happen in financial services, and this new type of infrastructure is going to be able to allow people to transfer values in ways that is more efficient, and it's going to be like very impactful for institutions all the way down to the people that are in retail for the last mile.
Great, thanks. Jed.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Jed McCaleb, founder of SDF, Stellar Development Foundation. And why I got into it and what excites me about it is the potential to kind of do for financial transactions and economic connectivity what the internet did for information, which is like kind of level the playing field and democratize access and like reduce concentrations of power and let anyone connect to anyone else, right? And this is had all these kind of repercussions in the internet for information, led to all kinds of things we didn't anticipate, and we're hoping the same thing will happen with financial activity, where now someone, some kid in Mexico can now send like 10 cents to someone in Thailand, right? This just isn't impossible with today's infrastructure, but we're hoping to make that a reality, which I think will be really good for everyone. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jed. Mike.
Hi, Mike Warner, Senior Strategist in IT at the Federal Reserve San Francisco. First, the disclaimer, anything I say does not represent the press. Please don't. Right? So yeah, I'll be giving my opinions and perspectives. I've been, for the last 3 years, kind of deep diving as much as I can in blockchain and getting as close as I can to the kind of root, but trying to do so in the context of the various missions of the Fed as public servants to the community. That's ultimately our objective. If you look at the missions, to protect the safety and soundness of the financial systems. There's actually 5 of them. I'm not going to run through them all, but it's a multi-dimensional sphere, right? And as these things emerge, how do we understand how it will impact systems and make sure that we give you good guardrails? So.
Great, thanks, Mike. So that's a good place to start. I'm going to just launch into it really quickly. I'll start with you, Mike. So this cryptocurrency phenomenon that's been going on for 4 or 5 years. Maybe its origins go back a little bit further than that. You could probably trace it to 2008 and the financial crisis, and right after that is where Bitcoin, started to get legs. What, regardless of where we see this sequence of activities that has unfolded into this space that we call cryptocurrencies, what, if anything, do you see in changes in terms of the Fed and the things that it's doing and how it's thinking that will affect maybe the way it does things in the future?
So the Fed, remember the interval it takes to transform technologically is much shorter than the interval for regulations. Regulations can take years to produce. So that has created a natural drag. And remember though that as you get closer to like the board and the Fed, those people are august, like they're moving a tanker, right? And you may have a small sail ship, right? And we don't want to run you over, I think is a fair characterization. I'm going to reference Governor Brainerd, I'm going to speak in attribution. Governor Brainerd is essentially saying we're in a wait and see posture. We are incentivized, as everyone is, to make a better world. At the same time, when things go south, we have to be there to help prevent them from doing significant damage. Right now, the crypto, as I saw Gartner yesterday, said 3.1 trillion by 2030, which is still negligible. I mean, the FX every day is 5.3 trillion, so nowhere near a systemic threat. So it's too soon for us to even be worrying about this, I think.
Yeah, good. Okay, thanks for that. So let me just switch to a couple of my other panelists here. So we kind of have the old guard, so to speak, and the new world order represented here. So, but we're going to keep it friendly. So, Jed first, and then Tammy too. As you look at the financial services infrastructure today, in the context of what Mike said, it's hard to turn a big ship, and you want to be careful because it can crash into things. So, understandably cautious. What do you see are some of the problems with financial infrastructure today that maybe we're involved in trying to solve?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think he's right that it is a slow ship, and this is kind of the original thesis or one of the original theses of Stellar, is that you need like this new blockchain crypto idea is like super powerful, but you need some way to on-ramp the existing financial instruments, right? So Stellar allows you to tokenize any kind of form of value, so you can put dollars or euros and things like that. And you can kind of see that this rage is like caught on now with this like all this stablecoin phenomenon, right? And it makes sense because it's very hard for people, not just because the technology is so like pervasive everywhere, and it takes a long time to update that. But people are very slow to change their ways about how they deal with money. So convincing people to use this kind of new internet token is much more difficult than convincing them to use like a digital version of a dollar or a euro, something that they're used to. And so the idea is that if we can kind of start to bridge these two worlds, we can move people like slowly towards a better paradigm, right? And so that's kind of what we're shooting at. Like, let people use the traditional things, but in a digital manner, and so they can start to interact with the newer cryptocurrencies or the newer like forms of value and assets that are.
But I would say that yeah, the greatest barrier to entry is on the regulatory side. That is the slowest part about onboarding these types of assets. So what I predict is that you'll see them in markets that are underserved first, or smaller countries, and it'll be a trial. And then larger countries like the U.S. will follow suit if these pilots go well. So like right now, I can think of 10 smaller countries that are thinking about issuing their stable central bank issued stable coins. So I think in the next couple of years, it'll be a pilot and see how those go from a regulatory perspective as well as a user adoption perspective, and then perhaps we'll see some changes.
Great. So I'm kind of hearing a theme here a little bit. I'm going to go off script a little bit, but I want to talk about this notion of friction that's in the existing infrastructure, right? This idea that the current systems, which haven't really been changed in 50 years or more, maybe a lot more than that, at least in their form and construct. I'm talking about the national payment systems that allow people to move money, that enable payments, and you kind of see this I don't want to call it a monopoly, but this stronghold that the banks have by way of their association with the Federal Reserve, the central bank. They're the only ones that have access to this national payments infrastructure, the ability to move money quickly. And I think Jed said it earlier in his opening comments. We're hoping to be able to see the flow of money accelerate to the point of the way that information flows today. And so, is it possible, or is it valid to think that the advent of cryptocurrencies is really a way to say, I'm tired of waiting, right? The public domain needs access to these things, and there's ways to make it faster and safer and more transparent, and that's all a good thing. We talked a little bit about that last night, Michael, but any comments on that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we all know I can hand you $5 physical dollars in a completely frictionless way, right? But if I go to hand you a digital dollar, it may seem instantaneous, but it's T plus more. The Fed has a faster payments initiative underway right now. I think the thing to point out is one of the serious concerns is the design of money and the nature and structure of the banking systems are tightly coupled, right? If you open, right now, what distinguishes an organization that the Fed regulates versus others is they have a main account, and that's really your kind of LISIX, that's your big banks at the core of this kind of organism that we all live in. If you open up like minor accounts, if you let people have their own secure wallets, what happens, right? Why would you put your money in a bank, right? You see, there's a lot of unintended consequences that can happen, I think, when you start playing with the very heart of an organism, like an economy, right? So I'm very bullish on the future and how these things work, but you can't just throw out a coin and expect the accrued wisdom that is embedded in banking systems. There's a little bit of wisdom, there's a little bit of blood in history, right, over the last 500 years since banks were invented, but you have to be careful, I think. Right. It's short.
Yeah. So I see this spectrum emerging of cryptocurrencies that are kind of the antithesis to, well, if you won't let me in the circle, I'm going to go create my own circle, and that's received a wide following and a lot of momentum, that cryptocurrency space. But there's lots of volatility. I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding about what they are. They have different utilities because they have different purposes. And so along the spectrum from cryptocurrencies on one end, and Mike, what you're talking about, which is central bank issued, digital fiat or CBDCs that become legal tender, there's a spectrum in between. And where we find ourselves now in that spectrum is this mania of stable coins, right? So it's like, okay, well, cryptos are volatile, so we'll do something that will help stabilize their value. And what we'll do is we'll tokenize cash. Tammy, I mean, that's the space that that Stronghold exists in, right? Primarily, you've issued a U.S. dollar stable coin. We've made use of it in the WorldWire product as a settlement instrument. A lot of FX, international FX, is priced through the U.S. dollar, so it kind of makes sense to do that. It's a nice intermediary asset. What, based on what I described and the founding of your company, I mean, what were some of the motivations there? And did I hit on some of the things? And what are some of your clients talking about in the uses of this stable coin, kind of beyond what we're using it for?
Sure. I think kind of what sets our particular stablecoin apart from the rest is that it is actually safer than cash, right? Believe it or not. You can have conditional upon issuance. You can set conditions on it, so you can pre-authorize a transaction and make sure that the person on the other end isn't in an OFAC sanctioned country. You can also KYC every holder of the asset, which is very attractive to compliance and regulators, because you know who has held this asset at all times. We can't say that for cash. Like, where did the dollar bill in your pocket come from? You have 24/7 open ledgers where you can audit these transactions at any time. You also can't say that for cash. And so, there's all these properties that go into this particular asset, the stable coin, and it's just very, very attractive to financial institutions that we're working with, so they can be compliant.
Great. So looks like cash, can work like cash, but safer than cash.
That's right.
Is the idea.
Yeah.
Right. Great. Yeah. I mean, sounds like a win-win. So I think we're all of the same mind that we need to see this progress. So Jed, I'll go to you really quick. Stellar is a blockchain network that I think most people associate with Lumens because of the crypto craze that's happening right now. But really, Stellar is really kind of a token registry and a token asset management platform, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then also about what other kinds of non-cash assets are you seeing starting to be tokenized?
Sure. Yeah. Yes, financial institutions and currencies all interoperable, because really, I think it's very hard to get everyone to move to one central thing, or not central thing, but one single thing, like either whether it's the dollar or Bitcoin or whatever. People are going to want to use lots of different local currencies and assets, and the trick is really just to make all these things interoperable. And the way you do that is allow them all to be represented in the same system, right? And so that's what Stellar is. You can represent dollars, Bitcoin, and really any kind of asset. And the cool thing is you can trade them between each other once they're in the system. So if I'm holding dollars and I want to send you pesos, they can seamlessly be converted between each other, things like that, right? And so that enables cross-border payments and essentially interoperability between all these financial networks. But people have used it beyond fiat. I mean, we built it for fiat for cross-border payments, but people have used it for things like, let's see, gold, shares of real estate, carbon credits, coffee beans, all kinds of kind of novel things people have come up with. And what I hinted at before, where the inventors of the internet didn't kind of anticipate things like Wikipedia or Airbnb. These kind of arise once you give people this open platform, and that's what Stellar is, this open platform. So we expect lots of innovation and cool things to be developed. So yeah.
That's great. So as you bring up this idea of one network or a series of interoperable networks, but let's just assume it's kind of like one logical network, and on that are tokens that represent ownership of real-world assets, including cash, but also other asset classes, and those can be dynamically, kind of swapped in real time. That seems to me to have a huge implication for the future of just transaction processing everywhere, right? I mean, if you look at all sorts of markets, the capital markets, and this what I would consider to be somewhat absurd notion that between the time that you commit to buying a security on a stock exchange and the time it's actually yours and you've paid for it can be 2 to 3 days later. That just seems, when assets are represented digitally, and they can therefore be exchanged, and the asset represents ownership on the digital asset represents ownership today in your mind.
I mean, there should just be way less friction, and they should be way more efficient. And people can, you could buy your coffee with your Apple shares or something like that, because these are just assets that can be converted in between each other. So it just opens up a world of possibilities that I think we'll be surprised by the results.
Right.
Yeah.
Mike, you look like you were going to say something there too.
Oh, I don't know. Let me ask quick. I want to ask a question, then kind of come at the.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to get rich from this? I'm just serious. Anyone who's doing blockchain, I always feel this tension where, on the one hand, if we create another Jeff Bezos in the blockchain revolution, then we did it wrong, right? Because it's about the commons, it's about decentralization, and I hear that's the spirit of this. But how do you incentivize? Why? I'm always befuddled that people aren't tokenizing things that aren't yet tokenized. If you look at the UN 17 sustainability goals, why hasn't anyone tokenized clean air, clean water, and created some kind of collective coin? Where's the emergent systems that don't exist? Why are we beating up banks? Why aren't we building new things that don't exist? Right? There's all these planes where there's no money yet, right? I'll pivot there, and that's an attempt to answer that question. I want to,
Right.
yeah.
Well, I can say that I think, why we've picked, the transfer of value is because there is the most friction there.
Okay.
Particularly in cross-border payments where, people are making, $5 a day.
Yeah.
They're getting 20% taken for each transaction, and that's a lot of money. So it's kind of, in the spirit of that, and making that more efficient to level the playing field.
Yeah. I would also say that having like traditional assets like fiat or what have you on these networks enables kind of all these other use cases, right? So, like for instance, this coffee bean thing that I mentioned, it is a new way of a new thing that's tokenized, but it depends on having like some sort of dollar or other fiat currency in the network that they can trade for these coffee beans,
Sure.
right? And the same is true for a lot of the other things that you mentioned. I think they, in isolation, they don't make sense, but once you have like more of the financial infrastructure there and like interoperating with this network, then you can start to have these kind of innovations.
Right.
So
And,
Go
and
ahead.
I will say that there have been, the examples that you've just mentioned, people have tried those in the
Yeah.
past.
What happens?
I just don't think there's a lot of user adoption.
Got
at
it.
those
Too early
things.
for those kind of
It
things.
could be too early. And hey, we are still in the infancy of the financial infrastructure part as well.
But it sounds like you're taking us back. There was a time in the United States we had 5,000 different currencies, right? Now you're going to have today we found out, Jesse pointed out that there's a new JP Morgan stablecoin, right? And so we're going to end up with 5,000 new currencies. I think your interledger, like that's going to be, like my grandmother doesn't care, that what it is, right? Does all this stuff become like behind the scenes? Is that?
I think so. Yeah. I think you basically have your preferred currency or preferred provider or your bank or what have you, and then that interoperates with other ones, and you don't really care how it gets there. Like as long as each person ends up at the end of the day with the thing that they care
So if
about.
they ever did create a digital dollar, or the design should be agnostic to the rails, would you agree with that? It should almost be like a standard or like a Merkle kind of entity. Well, now I'm getting past it. You guys in Merkle Mountains and stuff, like, are you?
I know Merkle, Merkle, the
Merkle, yeah,
chocolate.
okay. But yeah, how would you guys design a digital currency for the United States? Or any country?
Jed, there's your opening right there. Federal Reserve asked Jed McCaleb how to create a digital currency. Here we go.
I mean, you have to have somewhere that is represented in some digital form that you trust not to be like defrauded. That's why you can't just issue it on any kind of platform, because some of these things might have security vulnerabilities, and then you end up with like an extra billion digital dollars over here that you don't know exactly what to do with, right? So it's not like you can just put it on any platform.
Sure.
But,
Right.
So you have to trust the network itself,
Right.
the topology, the
Yeah.
system.
So Michael, this is good. You kind of launched us into this, and I think it's a nice segue to this notion of financial inclusion, right? Because there's this infrastructure. I think the answer is we're kind of focusing on the infrastructure because that's where the friction is. And once we get the infrastructure kind of laid or relayed, then we can extend this to everyone. So there are some pretty staggering figures, right? If you say, I think you started out by, are you doing this to get rich? So there's kind of this capitalist motive, and then there's maybe this altruistic motive on the other end. Not to juxtapose those two things explicitly, but there are in fact 2 billion people in the world, 2 billion adults who are unbanked. They don't have access to financial services, right? They're in emerging economies. I hear clapping out there. We can help them, right? The irony is that 1 billion at least are carrying smartphones, right, and are connected to high broadband wireless networks, right? So they have the capacity not only to do transactions, but also why wouldn't we, kind of move forward full force with that? And again, I'll come back to you, Michael, and ask, the U.S. dollar, for better or for worse, is sort of a de facto kind of trade currency around the world. Things kind of trade through the U.S. dollar. The Federal Reserve is in the business of managing monetary policy. Does that policy, in your mind, could it extend to, by way of the creation of a central bank digital currency, export the dollar to places where banks can't go today? And is that a benefit to those regions and something that we should be pursuing? Again, we're not going to quote you in the media, so expect all those reporters that are standing over there with their phones and cameras out. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, I hope you don't rely on us to do it. Working in the government, I'll tell you, you don't want us to do it, right? And where I'm trying to go with this is, if you start looking at like microtransactions and such,
right.
And as that stuff starts to lift up, the volume of transactions, I think you're going to see banks change, obviously, and the central bank itself will change. But I don't think we're going to be the tail that wags. We're not going to be the tail. We're going to be the tail that wags the dog. Might work, right? We're not going to be first, and I don't think we're historically ever have created the systems themselves. But it will end up being acts of Congress eventually, but maybe it won't. And the key is to make sure that you don't have revolution, that it's an evolution. I think that's the key. But I kind of feel like I dodged your question. I'm not sure.
That's okay. That's all right. I'm used to it by now. Yeah. Talk about central bank digital currencies, because that's a lot of people. There's a lot of anticipation about that. We see this progression, this momentum. But let me pause for a second before we get there and talk about JP Morgan. So this morning, many of you may have read that JP Morgan has decided to tell you here. So that's awesome. Anything to say about that from any of you? Tammy, I mean, you're kind of a pioneer in the stablecoin space. Now you've got this big monster over here. Does that pose a threat? Is it synergistic? Do you see it as validation and let's go together? What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely see it as validation because at the end of the day, it's the same currency, right? We've issued U.S. dollars on the blockchain, and they have as well. So, and as you know, like money is like the largest network effect in the world, right? And especially, I would say, the U.S. dollar, because everybody knows what it is, they trust it, and so just the more that we have in circulation, the more we have in consumers' hands, the more popular it will get, and the more people will become used to like trading currencies in this way.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I see it as a big win.
Good thing then. Yeah. Jed, any thoughts?
I haven't had a chance to read too in detail of what they're actually doing specifically. My sense is, right, and obviously you can have controls on it, but if it can't organically start to interoperate with other things, then might as well just have a database kind of situation. So, but I don't know. I haven't looked that closely at it. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope for the positive.
Yeah.
Right. Thoughts?
Oh, just a reminder what fiat means, right? It's you, right? It's the U.S. dollar is the aggregate representation of us, right? So, does it make sense to have a more granular articulation? Like, there's parts of your brain which deal with your hands, right? Why there's currency and transactions happening. So if you view the economy like a person, the central bank's like the basal ganglia. It's like a part of like if you research it, actually has the properties like a central bank does relative to banks, and you can roll it out, and it's a pretty good metaphor for the NAICS architectures of how economic systems work and such. And where I'm going with this is, why not have 1,000 blossoms bloom? The organism will accept that which works, and it will reject that which doesn't, I think is the way things work.
Right.
20 years. But.
So that's it kind of reminds me of someone that I've been reading again back from my economics classes a long time ago. But Friedrich Hayek in the 70s, he seems to be the poster boy for a lot of the crypto pundits who advocated that monetary policy and currency issuance as a central entity is actually dangerous to economic growth because it's inherently susceptible to politics, right? And I think we can all relate to that in some way. And so he said you should allow businesses and enterprises and everyone to be able to issue their own currencies. And to your point, the best ones will survive, and the ones that are not stable or not valid will sort of drop off the map. In some ways, we're seeing that happen now, right? There's going to be different flavors of U.S. dollars digital US dollars, a Stronghold USD, a JP Morgan USD. You know, there's others that that have already been launched on different networks, and presumably they'll start to become fungible. Again, at what point does the Fed say, well, that's kind of our instrument, maybe we need to standardize that, or is that the way it buds, to your point? Is that the way that it grows?
I don't have an answer to that. Yeah, we'll get there, right? And probably, but what's the time frame? Do you guys guess? When anyone want to predict when the Fed will eventually get around? What will be the last? Right? Yeah, because if you're the one winning the game, what incentive do you have to change the game, the rules? You right?
Yeah.
Right.
So
good point.
Yeah. When would you see it? Like, because it seems like things are going a lot faster. If you go back a few years, things are going a lot faster than they seemed. Right? What one would have expected.
Right, that's good. So let's go down the line. When will we see? And it doesn't have to be a U.S. dollar. When will we see? The great anticipation is for a central bank to issue for public use, right? Businesses and consumers, a digital currency, right? A digital fiat. And by the way, it'll probably be smaller central banks that do that. And I've talked to a lot of central banks over the last 2 years. Jed's even been on a couple of those conversations with me around the world, and the irony is people will say, "Oh, well, that little country, it's not an impact." But it turns out that little country bases its currency on U.S. dollar reserves. So a lot of times those little countries are actually for the U.S. dollar, right? So now we got legal tender in a different country that's actually a proxy for the U.S. dollar. So it doesn't have to be the Fed. I agree, the Fed would probably go last. But what do you think? I mean, when is this going to happen? When are we going to see central banks really getting in this game?
I think that the smaller ones already are, to your point, and we should probably see a central bank issued stablecoin. I would say by the end of the year.
End of this year, okay, nice.
But in a pilot, okay, in a pilot. But for the Feds, probably 10 years. Yeah.
Bullish. I like
Bullish.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of central banks out there, so I do think it's going to happen sooner than most people think. Yeah, I would say within 3 years for sure. Like when it's actually usable, I do think a pilot will be fairly quick. But to actually be usable widely, probably 3 years. And then the Fed, I don't know, 20.
Working hard on that. Well, Michael, you kind of posed the question. What do you think? You got an inside track. I'm not going to quote you on it.
Well, no, but I'll say since we're at IBM, have you guys seen the Watson avatars, right? Like you can't just do value alone. You have to combine it with intelligence and trust, right? And that's blockchain's adding the trust. So we already kind of have. Imagine like. There's 180 central banks, just so it's a good number to have in the back of your pocket, right? Imagine 180 avatars. We're all wearing those holographic, augmented reality, not virtual, and you see these avatars walk around that represent the different economies, and they're emoting and expressing all these dimensions of themselves. Maybe we have mood rings, right, where in Spain they tried it, but people were cutting off each other's fingers, right? So it knows you've got a heartbeat, but like some kind of avatar that lets you see the collective mood of the planet. It's like green right, and then it will take different forms when you talk to it to express different things. Why am I saying all that? Because if you get money right, you can create. Ray Kurzweil talks about the singularity in 2047. We're going to live through the super intelligence emerging. Like the money needs to be coupled to the intelligence, or you run the risk of getting that dystopia in the future. So connect the dots between blockchain and AI out there, I would say. If you can have smart, multi-party, distributed computation networks, secure computation networks, that's going to solve trans-jurisdictional issues.
Right.
Sorry, that's
okay, no, that's good.
For people in the audience who might be familiar with those things.
We're going to give the audience. Let me just end on this, just kind of a quick prediction, and I'll start by looking back in history. 150 years ago, there was a raging debate that involved even the executive office. Andrew Jackson was wholly against the use of paper money and the issuance of bank notes, and believed that only coins minted in precious metals should be considered legal tender, which is poetic justice, I guess, that the Fed put his face on the $10 bill, right? for all of history. But my point is that debate raged pretty high at high levels for a while, and now we don't even think twice about using paper money. What's it going to look like 5 years from now, 50 years from now, once this debate has resolved itself, right? Because the debate back then was every bit as bitter as this debate over, digital currency versus fiat currency or cryptocurrency. So if you could fast forward, and I think, Michael, you provided a really nice, kind of framework where the data, the intelligence, the information, and the money are all coupled together and they all move together. What does the world look like in your mind? Just fast prediction, 5 years or 50 years out. What does it look like to you, Tammy?
Yeah. Wow. The world is just going to be smaller and more connected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really think the debate is between like traditional things and digital money. I think it's clear that money is going digital. It's just the form that will take, like the amount of privacy people will have, the amount of like autonomy and like freedoms they'll have to like move it around who they want to. The more it'll be like cash versus other things. I think that's the real trade-off, and I think we'll be better the more it's towards cash.
Great. So. And Mike, you kind of brought up that big question. Like, where do you see it going?
Yeah, as a user of the innovation, I want to be able to say, see something on the news about the rhinoceros in Malaysia and be able to say, I want to give 15 pico dollars every day to saving the rhinoceros, and have it auto-magically go through kind of human-enriched consensus networks of expertise that magically pay the farmers not to plant the crops, right, and not worry about it. I think it gets deep into like the fact that you have to incorporate corporations. It gets all gnarly, but a future where we can just have a clear transaction between our collective, that balance between our collective good that we all want and our individual goods will be more mediated better. We'll have a better world. That's what I'm hoping you guys are building.
Awesome. Hey, you're involved in it. It's not just up to us.
We're just going to say no to it the whole way. That's our job.
Until 10 years from now.
So before we end, there's a big crowd here, and I know this is a controversial topic, and it's a fun topic to talk about. I want to give the audience a chance to just ask a few questions of our panelists. I see a hand up there. Will you stand up and speak as loudly as you can? I'm sorry, we don't have a mic that's going around, but I'll repeat it.
So it's I guess starting with Michael and the great Kurzweil dystopian future, but just because you can do something doesn't mean. So what happens if it's a digital asset that's owned by a state, that then if you disagree with that state's politics, they can, it's traceable, they can shut you off.
You want to take it?
Yeah.
Want to repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm going to repeat the questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is, as this digital asset model sort of progresses, what if it's a state that issues a digital asset? Because states do have some level of sovereignty, and then there's this federal government overriding. What does the Fed do in that case, where the state might issue digital currency and the federal laws don't agree with the state laws?
Sure. So on the one hand, if you're doing human trafficking,
Question. That wasn't his question.
No, wait.
Like if the government disagrees and the state is outside of a private banking institution, the state owns the banks, if they're issuing something that I think Tammy was saying, right, it's now easier traceable than dollars, right? I guess
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Protecting our liberties, fundamental, right, in a free society. That's what's worrying in some of our other countries that are happening, right? But on the one hand, you want to be able to stop human traffickers. If you catch them, yes, like turn off their money. It's gone, right? On the other hand, so maybe privacy becomes an attribute that you can decays over time. When we design our money, that's why you want to make sure it has whatever properties are necessary to preserve the principles that we believe in. I think that's fair.
Yeah,
we do it.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I mean, this goes back to my point before. It's not really a debate of whether money will become digital or not. It's definitely going to become digital. It's just a question of like how much freedom that money will have, or how freedom and privacy you have with cash. And I think obviously there are trade-offs, but the closer we get to cash, I think the happier and like better society will be long term, because people inevitably make mistakes about control. So yeah.
Great. I think we have time probably for one more question. Go ahead here in the front.
I just wanted to ask, today we're talking about central banks, but we're talking about central banks in the age of decentralization of money. So my question is, do you think there will actually be, in the future, central banks, the way that we know them today?
Sure.
So you want me to repeat the question? So we're talking about central banks in the age of decentralization in the future. do we think there will actually be central banks?
Yeah, and that might be the answer to the prior question. In fact, there may be a decentralized bank where it's the consensus fabric of society that the panopticon concept, if the state is some person, if there's asymmetry in information and one person can see everything that no one else can, that's danger, right? And if the power of what these people are building is it can break that out where we all sit in the middle, so to speak. It's like a hypersphere. We're in the middle and on the edge for each other. And that could be a route with some of these technologies. I worry about zero K proof and stuff, but there needs to be some audit function. But how do you go ahead? Sorry. But, yeah.
No.
I totally think they'll be around in terms of like, for example, like OFAC. So many other international countries have accepted those regulatory policies, and so there'll be it might not just be the Fed, but it'll be like some organization that has consensus over monetary and regulatory policies that kind of govern in which the way the assets move.